Do you love books but don't have time to read them? Do you wish you could listen to your favorite stories while driving, working out, or doing chores? If so, you need Audible, the world's largest library of audiobooks and podcasts. With Audible, you can enjoy unlimited access to thousands of titles across genres and categories from bestsellers to classics, thrillers, romance, fiction, and nonfiction. You can also discover new and exclusive content from Audible Originals, featuring original stories and performances by celebrities and authors. Plus, you can download your audiobooks and podcasts offline for listening anywhere, anytime, on any device. And with Audible Plus, you can get even more benefits, such as unlimited listening to select audiobooks and podcasts, free exchanges and returns, and a 30-day free trial. So what are you waiting for? Join Audible today and start your listening adventure. Visit the show notes to support the show and get your free Audible trial today. Thank you for your support.
And now, on with the show.
Gentlemen, is there a time in your life that, when you look back, you only now realize you were living through history?
Yeah, it was Obama's election, and not in the way people, because at the time we knew we were living through history because first black president, all of that. But I don't think we really understood what that was going to do to the country, because we are now living in the hellscape that this country has become because half of the country lost its goddamn mind that a black man got that much power. And I don't really think we realized how much fallout there was going to be. I know there's like jokes and everything, like, they didn't Get Out, oh, I'd vote for Obama third time if I could. There was a lot of like in the air, like, oh, we solved all these problems, everything's good now. And we just we really just did not know what happened when Obama got elected, and what not like he did it on purpose. It's just this country's fucking racist as hell and lost its goddamn mind, and all the shit we kind of held in this country under the surface kind of just exploded outward, and we're still dealing with it now. I don't know if things are getting better. I know we hope they peaked in insanity in 2016. But then I don't know. January 6th was another peak of insanity of just, we're still mad that a black guy got power. You know, even as an 11-year-old, we knew 9/11. We were living through history when that happened, so that's like not a good answer. And I think maybe for me, maybe Mike will say something from like the 90s, but like I think really it comes down to Obama's election for me. Both his elections, I should say.
Well, Tom set me up perfectly for my answer, which is, yeah, it was the 90s. I remember, like, if you were a kid in the 90s, you knew Bill Clinton, and you knew Bill Clinton was cool because he was on Nickelodeon, and he was in the opening credits of the Animaniacs. So he was cool. We liked him. Good. We know he's good. I remember being just a little kid, and again, we're talking about, like, history you didn't realize was living through history, and hearing people talk about on the news, like, Bill Clinton impeached, and I kind of like asked my parents, like, what's that mean? Well, it means some people are mad at him. Okay, guess that's pretty normal, right? And then that runs all the way through to, my vivid memory of, like, in school, the election's coming up, Gore versus Bush, and the teacher going, so, the next morning, why don't you, if you can, like, talk to your parents about the election and what happened? And, bring in the newspaper if you can. And then going down in the morning to my mom at the breakfast table and going, so who's president? And her looking at me with a face like I've never seen before of just, we don't know. And again, I'm just like, oh, weird. And that was it. And looking back, in the same way that Tom mentions, like, not knowing that the Obama election was going to unleash what it did, like, there is just something about, like, looking at the hyper partisanship that occurs with the Newt Gingrich and the Clinton impeachment, and Ken Starr and all of that, where, like, when you consider that in the 80s with Iran-Contra or in the 70s with Watergate, there were people in the opposing party who basically went, we should probably go after these guys, but that might be bad for the country. Good for our party, but it might be bad for the country. And from Clinton impeachment onward, there was just this idea of whatever is good for the party, I believe is good for the country. Like, there's no separation. And obviously, again, at the time, Bill Clinton getting impeached was just, I guess some people are mad at him for something, but now you look at that and go, oh, that's where bipartisanship dies. Like, that's it. It's gone now. gamesmanship is everything. And now, like, every Democratic candidate, Ted Cruz or Newt Gingrich has been like, well, I guess we're going to impeach him. Like, it's just become a blunt tool now. So certainly didn't realize that was going on at the time, but it's, a pivotal point in American history.
I've actually got an answer for this one too, and it's, I guess, if you went back from Obama getting elected, then I'm getting forward from when Obama got elected, because I would say it was finding out that we killed Osama bin Laden. Because at the time, I remember being online in high school, somebody mentioning that a neighbor of his supposedly had tweeted that there was an operation going on. And at the time, I don't think any major news station had tackled it. And at that time in my life, I really relied on my folks and being like, okay, like, what's MSNBC saying, or Fox, or anything like that. So the idea that, like, I came down and went like, hey, we might have gotten bin Laden, and having this moment of like, oh, you can't believe everything that you see online, to within like 5 or 10 minutes being like, oh yeah, no, we got him. And kind of feeling this shift from, I don't know, like this 24-hour news cycle that you could turn into, to quite literally tuning into like every second, getting a live update from the world, and just the way that we changed how we shared information. Like, kind of, and then a passing of the torch, for better or for worse. And like, here we are now, like, Twitter isn't necessarily that same space where you can get that reliable information, but it's clearly seen important enough to be suppressed now, and God only knows kind of like what evolves from there. But just sort of seeing the way that we've, I don't know, just degraded from there, just the evolution of communication from the internet there, I think is hard to deny.
Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, we're joined by Celia Blumm, a current high school teacher and former high school student during the time of the 1968 documentary High School.
Our guest today is not only a high school English teacher, but a, as they put it, survivor of the late 60s educational system. Celia Blumm joins us on the show today to talk about Frederick Wiseman's High School. Celia, thank you so much for joining.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful experience looking at the documentary.
I thought you were going to say it's been a wonderful experience getting this recording going, and I would call you out as a liar up front because
Well,
we can't pull up an illusion this early into the program. We can't deceive the people this early on. Our program is a little confusing, but I'm so glad that we got you on to have this conversation. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and making this work.
oh, well, thank you for remembering our storied history as a teacher student. That's kind of cool that you remember. I mean, hopefully that means that I hopefully did a little better job. And I don't think I ever read Casey at the bat to you, but we'll get there. I'll be led by you. You can work your way through.
Nobody's perfect, I feel like the country would be a lot better off if every student got to just be screeched at by an old woman, Casey at the bat.
There is no joy in Mudville or in Philadelphia, but I'm going to behave. I'm going to be led by you guys.
So yes, as you alluded, you are not just an English teacher. You were my English teacher in high school for sophomore year in the humanities program. And I think I might have touched on it in the show in the past, but the way that our that class was structured, there were basically two types of students in that class. There were the ones who were very academic and who performed well because they studied a lot and did all the work. And then there were the ones who performed well by sheer luck because we were absolutely not suited for an academic setting.
Exactly.
Failed to do the work, mostly hung out in the back by the coffee machine and talked about art and the Beat Generation. And I was in that latter camp firmly in high school.
Absolutely. And I will not go public on which type of student I enjoyed more, but I will say the first group, my affectionate nickname for them were the grade whores. It's all, and I spent the entire year trying to wean them from their obsession with 99. Anyway,
I I just love audience can hear Tom doing that laugh on that statement because the valve has come loose because obviously, you were my teacher, Tom. This is your first time meeting my co-host Tom, who was a graduate of the Levittown High School system, and I'm sure he's thrilled to talk about
okay.
that. But Tom, who was prepped, I'm like, listen, this was my former teacher. Like, let's make sure that we keep ourselves behaved. So once you drop grade horse, he's already like, oh, the valve's a bit looser. I don't have to worry as much.
Looser, boy. She blew it off.
Well, listen, there was the time, you should know, last season we had Dr. Robert J. Snyder on, who was written, his father had written the book on Pari Lorenz. He's a film professor. And the first thing he says to Tom when he gets on, he goes, boy, you sure can cuss. Right off the bat, that's the leading statement. So it's the bar has been sent.
That's such I love that's such an endearing word, cuss. It's so like definitely, yeah, that's a very complicated word. I like it. I like cuss. Yeah.
Yes, so we were, I was a student in that class, and when I knew we had this film coming up, I was saying like, I'd like to try this. This is the person I want to try and get on for this. And so I
Well,
shot you a message, and you were very nice enough to agree to come on, which is very cool.
well, I mean, I really enjoy, and not to again get like, I mean, obviously this film is ridiculously timely right now because we are at another like inflection point with education in this country, and so yeah, so this is really a very timely conversation, I would think.
Yeah, that's we'll get into it more, but like that is kind of the thing about not just this film, but like Frederick Wiseman's filmography entirely,
Mhm.
is that they absolutely, because he is so into this direct cinema. I mean, it's we last season, our listeners might know, we talked about Primary by
Mhm.
Robert Drew and Associates, which was one of the landmark direct cinema films following around JFK on his campaign trail.
Mhm.
Wiseman is, takes that torch of direct cinema and runs with it, in terms of no voiceover, no title cards, no interviews. He's a fly on the wall filming institutions. And what's so interesting is in all of his, especially his early work, obviously he is capturing a specific time, right?
Yes.
He's late 60s, early 70s. And those are specific moments in time, inarguably. But of those early films, like they all still ring true today because what he's really doing is he's capturing an institution.
Yes,
And
absolutely. Even that opening long, long shot of the school, it's just indistinguishable from, it could be a factory, which I guess indeed it was.
I mean, we'll touch on this a little bit before we get into high school specifically. Tom and I have been texting a lot about just this amazing thing of, we always love when like a filmmaker kind of emerges fully formed. And that's absolutely true of Frederick Wiseman. Before he ever made a documentary, the only thing he had done is he had produced Shirley Clark's The Cool World, which is like a
Mhm.
docudrama, which is very good. We'll be talking about it on a future season. Then he decides, okay, I'm going to make a documentary because I'm interested in mental institutions. So I'm going to go
Yes.
to this Massachusetts mental institution, and they're going to let me film everything. And they do. They let him film everything because they're like, there's nothing wrong with what we're doing here. And the result is Titicut Follies, which is so
Mhm.
infamous in its depiction of abuses that the state of
Yes.
Massachusetts sues for it to not be seen.
Yes. Oh no, I think Philadelphia was threatening to sue him over
Yes,
high school too.
that's
Yeah.
what's so funny is that he makes Titicut Follies, that gets sued into oblivion. Titicut Follies just got inducted into the National Film Registry this past year. So then his next move is he says, okay, well, my last film was about a failing institution, so I want to make a documentary about a successful institution.
Mhm.
And he chooses this Philadelphia high school, and whoopsie, turns out wasn't as successful as he'd hoped.
Oh,
But he makes the documentary, and as you alluded, Philadelphia threatens to sue him. And it does get released, but it becomes hard to see. So after those two controversies and getting threats and lawsuits, he decides, you know what, my next film's going to be about? The cops. So he
well,
makes,
let's go to a less controversial setting.
yeah,
Yeah, let's
yeah.
go warm.
He's filmed, so Law and Order is his third film,
Mhm.
about police in Chicago in the aftermath of the '68 Democratic Convention.
Oh, yes, I remember that affectionately. Yeah, that was lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, things ran smoothly from what I heard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Humphrey got the nomination, and all the young people went "Yay!" and threw a big
Yeah.
party. That's what I heard. Yes, Tom, your favorite character from last season, Hubert Humphrey, returns again.
Oh, God.
I mean, listen, every movie would greatly benefit from having Hubert Humphreys in it. And I don't mean the actual man. I just mean a character named Hubert Humphreys, because
Oh, you're enjoying
that
that politically. I see. Mhm.
that
He-
just
oh.
feels like a name from like a satire of like, I don't know, high society in the South.
Hubert Humphrey is what, like,
Peter Sellers would play a character named
Yes,
Hubert
absolutely.
Humphrey.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Oh, my gosh. Absolutely. A la Inspector Clouseau. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, Hubert Humphrey, in essence, feels like a character John Kennedy Toole made up for a Confederacy of Dunces. But he's a real guy. He makes that, and then the last film in this, like, quadrilogy is he makes Hospital, which is the first
Yes.
of these films that if you watch them in order, you feel any sense of hope from.
Right. I remember.
Because they're
Excellent.
trying their best.
Mhm.
And that's one to watch. You know, you talk about the timelessness of this stuff. I mean, I did the run. I rewatched everything from Ticket to Hospitals ahead of this,
Mhm.
which was not good for my mental health at all.
Mhm. No.
I texted Tom right afterward and said, if you're thinking of rewatching Ticket, don't.
Yeah.
You won't feel good.
I wasn't planning on it.
No.
I seem to remember what Titicut Follies was like,
Yeah.
and didn't feel like I needed to.
See, and I just watched a little bit of High School 2, which
Oh,
was
yeah.
kind of like, and that actually helped me psychologically and emotionally, because it was kind of Wiseman saying all is not lost, you know.
Yes,
So,
and yet he's drawing parallel. I mean, Wiseman loves kind of. He has talked about how his films are very consciously reflections of his previous films,
mhm,
and
mhm.
you know, and we'll get into this more. We'll do the register statement in a second, but like, it is interesting with High School 2, watching him kind of unconscious, or you know, like without addressing it too much, contrasting. Like, one of the scenes we all remember from high school is the sex ed lectures about basically if you look at another person, you'll get them pregnant. And then in High
That
School 2,
please. Let's not talk about that pervert gynecologist. He was disgusting.
we were talking about him plenty
He's
before
You
we
mean
got
Rodney Dangerfield's cousin?
I'm telling you, my skin literally crawled. I was so repulsed by what I mean. He should be arrested. I'm sure
It's-
he's dead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think it's gonna do much now.
Well, you know what? If he isn't, me and you, we'll go take care of him.
Yeah, let's go exhume him and kick the crap out of him.
Let's just go. He's probably hooked up to some wires in a hospital. We'll pull the plug. It'll be easy. We'll be in and out quick.
All right, I mean, yeah, I can cover. I look, mild mannered and like an feeble old lady, so I can pull it off. Yeah, I'll do it.
It's so that scene every time I watch, because I rewatched it last night ahead of this too. Every time I watch it, it is so, like, the fact that he starts out the lecture just exactly like you'd expect, like the number of partners could affect a marriage, and then when it's like, well, can you get pregnant from touching? And he just slips into like
Ugh.
Henny. He just becomes Henny Youngman. He just with what your nose and waits for laughs.
It's
He's
disgusting.
doing a bit. He's doing a bit. This is a rehearsed bit. This man does this every time.
Yeah.
He doesn't stray. You know, whoever left like that little note, that question, that was him. He planted it.
I never thought of that. Oh my God, you're diabolical. That's fabulous.
Oh.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, we will get into but I just think that the Wiseman run is fascinating to see that. And you're right. I'm glad you mentioned High School 2. I watched that as well, and the most interesting thing about High School 2, beyond the connections between the original High School, is that's when you get into the second phase of Frederick Wiseman's career, because the first half, like everything like Titicket Hospital, he's like, this is going to be a tight 86 minutes.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Later
yeah.
period Wiseman, he's like, what's that? You don't have 4 hours to spare?
I know. It was like Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet. It was
yeah.
it was an opus. Yeah.
I watched Ex Libris recently, which is his New York Public Library documentary.
Oh wow.
In prep for
I
this,
didn't even hear about that.
you can find it on Canopy if you have, and I'm not joking, 3 hours and 25 minutes to
Yeah, no,
watch.
that's a lot of that's a big investment at my age.
It
I'm
is.
never
I'm not gonna lie. I don't think I've spent 3 hours and 25 minutes in a library in my entire life, cumulatively.
Oh, that's tragic. Oh my gosh, that's awful.
we came up in a time where the internet was coming out. We didn't have to spend too
That's
much
Yeah,
time in
true. Oh my
libraries.
gosh, that's right.
That's
You
the
don't
other
need 'em.
thing. That's the other thing I should acknowledge about Tom, just so you know. When he says he doesn't spend time in a library, that is because one of the things about Tom that should be noted, it's not that he doesn't read books, it's the fact that whether it's books, Blu-rays, whatever, rather than borrow it from a library, Tom just blind buys things constantly. There are
Oh yeah.
so many. You can't see him because we don't have the cameras on, but behind him is a shelf full of Blu-rays. I would dare say at least 30% of which he has never seen and may not
Oh,
enjoy.
it's okay.
We
Yeah,
don't
Some
know.
it's a good number. That's
everybody
a
has to have a
good number.
guilty, impulsive pleasure,
Oh.
Although
Yeah,
it
you
actually,
can't survive on amphetamines this long. So
Um,
although I think one of my favorite quotes from high school was "Control your impulses." So there you go, Tom.
that's not just a quote. That is the thesis statement of that high school. The whole thing. All right. So before we get further into Frederick Wiseman's high school and what we have to say about it, let's talk about what the National Film Registry had to say. So here's what the Library of Congress said about Frederick Wiseman's high school. Filmmaker Fred Wiseman employed the techniques of a burgeoning documentary style known as direct cinema to capture reality truthfully and without narration. Wiseman roamed freely through Philadelphia's Northeast High School to document students continually clashing with administrators who confuse learning with discipline. Richard Schickel, writing in Life magazine, called this a wicked, brilliant documentary about life in a lower middle class secondary school. At 75 minutes, this is one of Wiseman's shortest documentaries, yet the impact is as memorable as his longer films. Wiseman's film Hospital, made 2 years later, is also in the registry. So that's the statement they had at the time. Now, as I said, Titicut Follies also just got in last year. So now Wiseman has 3 films he directed, and also The Cool World, which he produced, is in. But that is what the registry had to say.
Okay, wickedly, yeah. Okay, okay. Very
That's what you
succinct.
took. That's what you took from it. I took from it. Why are you calling him Fred?
I know. Well, that yeah, there must be on a front. They must be on a first name basis. I don't know.
good friend Fred.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like a buddy Fred. I mean, listen, I call him Fred a couple times in my notes, but it's mostly like when I'm watching his later films, and I'm like, Fred, Booby, we could maybe a solid 3 hours was fine on this one. I don't know if we needed to go 4 hours on Boston City Hall, my man. But but we love him. He's still out there, still working today. He,
I know. Isn't that so cool? I know. I kind of like looked him up, and I was like, "Good for you, Mr. Wiseman. Good for
yeah,
you."
he's a fascinating guy because he's weirdly, he's not brought up in the same way that anybody who goes to film school or learns about film, usually when you're talking about documentarians, you're talking about the Maisels or you're talking about Robert Flaherty or there's probably a big one that I'm not thinking right.
Arrow Morris.
Oh my God, thank you. It was on the tip of my tongue. I'm like, why can't I name
Yes.
Errol
I was
Morris?
like, is he missing Errol Morris? I'm like, what the fuck?
What if I just purposefully
right.
left him out? Like, what if I just consciously was like, no, I'm protesting it.
You're just like, fuck that guy.
I don't like that he made Werner Herzog eat a shoe. I'm still mad about it years later.
He should have made him eat 2 shoes. That's why you're mad, actually.
I am. I'm still mad about my son. My son, what have you done? We're going deep cuts here. But Wiseman, he does certainly has a following and appreciators. There's actually a podcast devoted entirely to just Wiseman's filmography. But I think there is something about his films that, because they are so fly on the wall,
Yes.
and they obviously do have things to say, and I think especially the earlier films, he shot a lot of footage. He's choosing what to show you. So he does have something to say. But I think because it's not as in your face,
Right.
right? I mean, even in the case of high school, like, there were many members of the administration in Philadelphia who saw the film and were like, yep, that's good. Shows
Yeah.
us doing a great job. It took, like, people pointing out, like, hey, no, some of this stuff, man, looks real bad for them
Well,
to kind of,
It's funny. It didn't hit me immediately, which I suppose I mean, for you guys that you're experts in film, it would have been you would have thought of it before you even started. But these people knew this was not like a hidden camera.
Yeah.
Gotcha documentary. These these administrators, these educators knew they were being filmed. So you have to assume that what they're bringing is what they perceive to be their best selves. And that to me like that to me is all the more horrifying, that this wasn't just like they had no idea somebody had a hidden camera in their lapel, blah, blah, this was them bringing it to assert their excellence, which to me just takes it to a whole new level.
Well, and you also have the element with that too. I mean, you have to imagine. I was taking note as I was watching this last night how few times you see someone look into the camera, right?
Oh yeah.
Very rarely. Which at that time, I think about this a lot. I was speaking with someone recently about the idea of like when you watch footage of like even like high school people or older people pre 9/11, when we don't have cell phones in our pockets or anything, like
Right.
people are much more conscious of a camera lens and trying to hide from it or be on it. And now we just take it for granted there's cameras. For
Yes.
them to not look in the lens so much implies to me, and I think knowing Wiseman's process, that there was a lot of film rolling before what we see in a given scene in order for
Yes.
them to feel comfortable doing
Yeah,
what
he
they're
spent
doing.
he spent months at that school,
Yeah.
from what I read. Yes?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And
So
he does. I mean, I think one of the things that Wiseman does well in a lot of documentaries. I mean, Tom evoked Errol Morris before, and Errol Morris has the Interrotron, where he's gonna have you sit and look directly into a camera
right.
in this weird machine. But it's also, I think, what Wiseman does with high school, and he does it with Law and Order too, is I think he also has the approach of there's a reason why some of the best interviews you'll ever get are from Playboy magazine or Howard Stern. And it's because in both cases, they are able to lull their subjects into a kind of security that nobody else can. Because if you're making them feel like, listen, man, I'm your friend, I'm on your side, we're all casual here. Like, I want to show how this, like in the case of Wiseman going, I want to show a successful institution. I want to show why this school works so well. And then you have the
Yes.
confidence to go, okay, that's why it works well. The same way, like, if Playboy is sitting down casually with Jimmy Carter, they can get him to say, I've committed adultery of the heart.
Right.
But if he was sitting
I've
down with,
lusted in
yeah,
my heart, or whatever it was. Yeah, I
but if
agree.
he was
Oh
sitting
well.
down with like Walter Cronkite or Ted Koppel, like
No.
he would never have said that.
No, they would have been on their guard. You're right, and I think, I don't know. I sort of remember reading somewhere that Wiseman even had like the students, who kind of like helped him and carried his stuff around for him. Like I guess he felt like he was really kind of embedded in the culture there when he
Yeah.
was there.
Well, because I was thinking about all of this stuff too and everything, and I was thinking about the time that it was made and all of that, and we've talked about this before too, about how documentaries really aren't like the documentary industrial complex hasn't taken off yet. It really is when Errol Morris does it that people kind of really get an idea of what documentaries are, and this is the 60s, and media literacy is a very different thing. I'm sure his process helped get these reactions and the honesty out of these people to just not realize they were being fucking ridiculous.
Yeah,
But I do
horrifying.
have to wonder if a lot of it has to do with them just really not getting it, not getting what the camera is going to do to them or what their actions are going to look like outside of the classroom. That there is just this lack of self-awareness.
Yeah, and certainly, so no self-reflection. I mean, they
Yeah.
do. It's almost like they're almost an advertisement for the product that they are allegedly, manufacturing, which is just automatons, thoughtless automatons.
And and you can speak to this too, Celia, from your perspective at the time. But like to me, as far as I'm concerned, when we're talking about where documentaries are at this time, if we're talking, I mean, he's filming this in what 66, 67, something around that time. If we're talking documentaries, I think for most of the people who hear you're going to be in a documentary, the thing that would most jump to mind is like the Walt Disney True Life Adventures, right? Like those were the
Right.
ones that were on television, so they're probably expecting like Thurl Ravenscroft is going to narrate going, and the teachers make sure that the students, and the
Oh
little
yes,
dainty music in the
absolutely,
background. Like direct
absolutely.
cinema is not, if the Drews are pioneering direct cinema, that's, Kennedy's campaign, even that barely gets on like public television. Direct
Mhm.
cinema especially is not.
And
No,
there's
yeah.
a lot of teachers in this movie where you could tell like they don't even like have a TV.
Yeah.
They definitely feel, oh, these damn kids and their TV.
There's
And their
the
hula
teachers'
hoops.
lounge scene where they're pretty much saying that. You know?
Yes.
Well, they're also just they're complaining about like the welfare state. And I'm just like,
Yep.
oh yeah, well, good thing we've got past this talking point in life.
That was one of my favorite, like, more subtle segues. Is he cuts from the teachers having their argument in the lunchroom to the poster of like the evolution of man, like, and you
Yeah.
see all the, you see all the Neanderthal, you see. I mean, it was just his editorializing is so profoundly vicious and perfect. I mean, but like you said, Mike, I don't think any of those people had the sense or had the knowledge that, like, oh my gosh, he's focusing just on my bifocals, or oh my gosh, he's going to show my mouth like some kind of a brutish, savage beast. I mean, yeah, his camera work is the way he sort of does the depersonalization and the anonymity with the camera. He doesn't need a voiceover. He just lets it.
And this is the only time he works with this cinematographer. I think if you look at the later films, and we can only infer, but you get the sense that he maybe thought that, like, this cinematographer might have been a bit too on the nose with his camera work at times,
Yes.
There are certainly moments that you're not going to see it again in Law & Order or Hospital where, like, we alluded to the guy giving the sex ed lecture, and, like, when he's talking about you boys need to be careful zooming in on his finger as a clear phallic image or anything like that. Like,
Yeah. No, and I think in high school too, his the editing was not. I mean, he was much sort of like respectful of the personal space. So you're right. I think that's a reasonable inference.
I mean, listen, I think that high school too, maybe it would have been better if there was a long, extended, uncomfortable montage of girls doing jumping jacks and zooming in on their rear ends set to a song by 1910 Fruit Gum Company.
Oh my gosh, Simple Simon Says. Oh,
Yes.
that was that's another one of my favorite, like, visual metaphors, that this whole school is built on the idea of following the rules, and yet they use the song Simple Simon Says, but they don't obey Simple Simon. They're using it as a choreographical backdrop. But I mean, to me, that was just so perfect. They're all so clueless, like Simple Simon Says, put your hands on your hips, but they are not putting their hands on their hips because nobody knows what is right and what is wrong in this skewed moral universe that they are constructing.
Oh, I truly, I agree with all of that. And there's also a note of mine that's just like, you don't hear this song anymore. And I always enjoy that when I'm watching something from the 60s and I'm like, sitting on the dock of the bay, which opens the movie.
Oh, love it. Love it. Yeah.
That still gets radio play today. But, like, the only time you will hear Simple Simon Says by 1910 Fruit Gum Company is either watching this movie or doing an MRI of Quentin Tarantino's brain. Like, those are the only times that you would ever hear this song.
Oh, don't get me started.
I did have a hard time.
Tarantino was the altar at which I worship. Like, I was in a film course at Fordham University the year that Pulp Fiction came out, and we actually got to go to the festival and meet him, and he was like, "Thank you, Janet Maslin." Oh man, it was one of the best moments of my life. Yeah. So anyway,
well, Tom is already, now he's 100% locked in. You can't see, but Ezekiel 25:17 is tattooed on his forearm. So.
Yes, it is. I still have it memorized too.
Oh my God!
I'm currently reading a book about the making of Natural Born Killers, and this writer, who is one of the producers of the movie, she does not like Quentin, and that comes through quite clearly in how she writes about him as like an almost semi-autistic one-trick pony, and he's just like, Jesus Christ, you do not like this guy.
Ooh, that's nasty. That's harsh.
I'm sure there's there's three sides to every story and whatever, but like the story she tells about him being a real fucking dickhead when they were trying to get this movie made, you just like, I can see why you don't like this guy. But then weird shots like, oh, Reservoir Dogs, Natural Born Killers, and True Romance are just the same movie, and I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I had a hard time with this movie, though, because we're talking about the music. I didn't know we were in the 60s. I needed more Creedence Clearwater. I needed Born on the Bayou or Proud Mary or something somewhere in there. Or maybe when they're reading the Vietnam letter.
There you go.
Like they should have played some Creedence. you know.
I know. Oh my gosh. Well, we got Simon and Garfunkel. Let's
Oh, yeah.
and and please, at some point we have to talk about the two, not one but two English teachers that got a little bit of FaceTime in the dub.
Oh, we absolutely. I promise you, we absolutely will. Especially because listen, I have a habit. If there's somebody from my past on this show that has contributed to my film studies, I have a habit of calling them out and blaming them. And you are among them. You may not remember this.
Tell me.
The first week of our year of humanities, you told every student in the class, you're like, you have to pick a work of art and write an essay on it.
Ooh, sounds like me.
And I asked you after the class, I went, well, I was thinking, in some senses, some consider film an art form. So could I write about a film instead of a static image? And you went, go for it.
Oh gosh, yeah. Film is like the literature of our time. I'm sorry. I mean, I minored in French film as an undergrad, and that was when a lot of that direct cinema, was happening. So oh my gosh, yeah, Mike. Let me tell you something. That's why I still remember you with my old, tired old long COVID brain here. But yeah, no, film is, I think, one of the most righteous art forms. It's absolutely phenomenal, and it's Anyway.
Yeah, we like it.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I mean, it's
okay. Fine. You do have the moments of regretting, the entire concept of cinema when you go to see something like The Flash and you're just like, I mean, maybe I could. Yeah, maybe I think I could live without like Pulp Fiction, and if this doesn't exist.
The Lumiere brothers made a mistake.
Please.
They did. Wrong kid died.
They did not.
Oh. But so what I'm saying is all of this podcast partly your fault.
Okay.
Like
I'm
really,
sorry.
you kind of pushed me in the direction.
So
of,
I have you to blame for all of this. For giving me homework in my 30s.
You'll have to try your best to shame me for the next hour and see.
But yeah, and in a sense, you alluded to the English issue. That is akin to, there is that moment in the film that you could tell Wiseman's kind of like, oh, cool. Which is, he cuts from the English teacher reading Casey at the Bat, and the class kind of bored, and then the other teacher, the younger kind of hipper teacher, going, "Okay, we're going to analyze the lyrics to Simon and Garfunkel's song."
Yeah, I mean, she was. It's so funny because I mean, just from a critical standpoint, I don't know, this idiot that was doing the worst reading, by the way, of Casey at the Bat that I've ever heard. I mean, I've actually heard that poem, because obviously that was a big deal back in the day. My father used to say that last, the last verses just, for fun. She was a horrible reader. She gave them, they did not have a hard copy of the poem. I mean, it was like, what the heck, bitch? Like, just go home,
Yes, drag her.
But then, like you said, I mean, and I gotta be careful when I say the younger, hipper one, like you, Mike, because I've obviously lived a very, very privileged life, being, white, female, European, blah, 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 blah. But I do get the okay boomer stuff. And now, of course, I'm victimized because I'm older, which is like a joke. Yet anyway, but the younger, I mean, yeah, she tried so hard. It kind of broke my heart, but the kids did not. And I watched that scene many, many times. The kids did not seem any more engaged. And then of course Wiseman immediately segues to the lunch lady dragging empty boxes of Scott toilet tissue while Simon and Garfunkel are still playing.
Yes.
So,
well, that's kind of funny thing that I do love about this movie is that it is taking the school to task, but it also does find its moments to be like, yeah, but these kids are little fucking idiots too.
Well, and to me, one of the more troubling, I guess it shouldn't be troubling because, I understand the evils of testosterone, but the only time that the boys seem animated is with the pervert gynecologist.
Yeah.
I mean,
like,
there
that's
is.
how to engage them,
Well, there is the one kid who's animated, which is again my favorite thing, and I sent it to Mike. It's maybe the funniest thing in the whole movie, and it's just one of those things. You're like, yeah, these kids are just little idiots. Like, the teachers suck, but this kid who's like, oh yeah, the teacher was yelling at me, so I just got up and said, I'll talk to you later when you're calm, and just leaves the class. And you're like, and he's like, kid, what did you think that was gonna work?
I know. I know.
And do you think that this Mike Judge character that you're talking to is going to take that as like, oh, you know what? This kid's got a good head on his shoulders. You know what? He turned me around. No suspension for you. In fact, you're getting a commendation. In fact, the school will now be named after you.
I know, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Like that kid, like, listen, kid, love it. I would have done the same thing in school of just being like, no, the teacher was a dick. I wasn't dealing with it. And the teachers would have been like, no, Tom,
Okay.
you're wrong. And I would be like, no, I don't care. They don't talk to me like that. I'm Tom Lorenzo. Don't you know that? But you just like, kid, what are you doing? Stop.
I'm kind of ashamed to admit, though, that I mean that actually never happened to me. I never had a student just storm out of my classroom, but I really don't think I would have. Like, I think I would have still tried to manage it with the student. I don't think I would have like written up. I don't think I ever wrote a slip, a referral, any of that crap. Like, I just had no use for it, you know.
I also like this kid is like telling this like vaudeville story then of like, oh, well, you know, it happened before where a kid threw a book at me and the teacher was like, hey, what are you doing? And they were like, he took our book, and they believed them. Can you even believe? It's like, kid, Jesus Christ, shut the fuck up already. Just take the detention. Shut the hell up. He's like, if fucking
he took it in protest.
And again, Mr. fucking Anderson from Beavis and Butthead's just like, all right, I accept that, and you're just like, dude, what is happening in this room right now? I just
Butthead, another great literary reference, Beavis and Butthead. Yep.
Well, like I told Mike, you know, you're in for a good 30 minutes when you watch a new episode of Beavis and Butthead, and one of the segments is called Stolen Valor. You're just like, oh yeah, we're in for a good ride. They haven't missed a beat.
All I remember is Cornholio. I don't know. I have to look up Stolen Valor.
I will state for the record that I never stormed out of one of your classes, though I will say I did storm out of the classroom that you taught in one. It was not one of your classes. It was.
Are you allowed to tell me the teacher, or
I don't remember. I barely remember the name, but I've told the story on the podcast before, actually. So we had senior year of high school in humanities. They had a film class. Right, it was a film portion, right? And
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I should have known where we were going. Where the teacher of the class, who really didn't want to be doing a film class, but she handed out the AFI 100 greatest movies list to the class, and she goes, "So I have a sense of what you've seen. Just use a highlighter and highlight whichever ones you've seen." And I raised my hand and just went, "I've got all of them. Like, what am I going to do?" And I kind of like, she eventually got to the point where she kind of just let me like run movies and talk about them.
Yeah,
she was
which
like,
probably the right decision. Definitely the right decision.
But the time I stormed out was they were going to screen Citizen Kane.
Oh gosh,
I've told this on the show before, so I apologize to her. But she goes, "So the film we're going to watch, Citizen Kane. It's kind of it's an older movie. It's black and white. It's kind of long. You know, a lot of people say it's the greatest movie ever made. I don't really get it, but you know, we're gonna watch it." And I was just like, I truly lost it.
I'm sorry.
Like, you can't start with that.
She's an imbecile.
Get her.
Well, you know, this is, but this is the problem. You were talking before about, you know, the Lumiere, but I mean, these are the people that want to just sit down with a popcorn, you know, with a box of popcorn and a Diet Coke, and like not even understand what the cameras do. Oh, please don't get me started. I love Orson Welles.
Well, that's kind of the funny thing too. Like going back to the scene with the teachers complaining about if you hand people anything that they won't appreciate it, and I'm just like, bro, you're a teacher. You're about to you're probably tenured. You don't have I know this guy is not doing hard work when he's in the classroom. So it's like, shut up about the welfare state, you absolute goon.
I know. Oh my God, that was yeah. But and I mean, I guess because we were talking about Mike being in a film class. Obviously, we need to talk at some point about I actually tried to research the history of the film program at Northeast High School, because I would have loved to see. I mean, those kids were like at least engaged enough to say like, this school sucks. And you know, I think it was the only
black kid.
Yes, the only child of color that actually was allowed to speak. And ironically, he was giving, like, he started his conversation by talking about how there were positives about the school. I think he was talking about the science program, the technology. I mean, but then, who was that teacher? Like, why is a film teacher's job to advocate for some assistant principal who's an idiot? Like, what was
Also,
her?
Well, I love
Also,
that.
what about the bit where the one teacher's like, "Oh, you guys can admit you're racist. There's no wrong answers here."
Yeah!
And like,
Oh,
no,
I
like
know.
no,
Oh my
like no, there is a wrong answer, buddy. It's the one where you say I'm a racist. That is the wrong
Oh
answer.
my God. There's no wrong answer to whether or not you would join a club that had African Americans. I mean, I can't. I know.
Hey,
There's
listen,
no answer.
that didn't stop anytime soon. One of my favorite things to talk about with people is the pilot of Family Ties.
Oh,
You guys remember
gosh.
Family Ties?
Yes.
The pilot of Family Ties essentially revolves around Alex P. Keaton starts going to a country club because he's got a crush on a girl who goes to that country club. And the dad, whose name I can't remember, either actor or character-wise,
Michael
apologies.
Gross,
Yeah. I see him, but I can't think of it either.
because he's Bert in the Tremors movies. Yes, I remember that. That's what I know.
So
That's what I bring to the show.
he kind of is scolding Alex, and he's being like, "But Alex, the club that you're going to discriminates against Jews and black people. Like, they don't let them in. They only let white Christians in." And Alex goes, "But Dad, I don't care about that. I'm just trying to get with a girl."
Yeah.
And the dad goes, "Okay." And that's the resolution. That's the resolution of the Family Ties pilot. It's insane.
So getting laid immediately supersedes any moral or ethical
And like,
forget it.
I know that Alex gets less conservative as the show goes on. That's kind of the whole narrative,
that's the arc.
right? But in the
Yes.
start, it just essentially being like, and that is the funny thing about Family Ties, is essentially just it's a whole show about going, all right, 70s activists, you lost.
I know.
That's the plot of the first season. It's just,
I agree.
you tried.
I agree.
You tried. Put on some Motown records and mourn your friend at a funeral. It's big chill time, buddy. You're done. You're out. It's over. But you know, it's funny. You mentioned that scene with the students complaining, and I do think, for as much as the film is obviously criticizing the school, Wiseman also captures, I think, a thing, and especially now in another time of activism, one of the fundamental images of activism, both in the 60s and now, and like leftist activism, which is there's going to be a person of color in the room trying to moderately suggest positive changes while still going, look, there are some positives, but I think there are things we can change. And then there's going to be a white guy in garish clothes trying to get laid going, I think it's a dump. The only good thing is it's well ventilated. I think we should burn the place to the ground. And you're like, oh, he's overpowering the other guy in the room, and he's not going to get anywhere. That's the whole arc there.
I think you're absolutely right, and this is why I was so struck by the film in its entirety. I mean, it's just so much of what's going on now. It just startles me. I mean, I'm really glad that I'm retired, because I could not. When I think of what I did, I used to have Mike, I don't know if you're even aware of this, but I mean, me and the social worker, he was just like around the corner from me. I mean, we had like an open pipeline of kids who were dealing with really difficult issues that they couldn't deal with at home. And so, I mean, I would be so fired in like a New York Minute if I was still working. It would be, sad.
I remember the social worker reminder because I do remember like my senior year. I don't know what teacher it was. I think it might have been my Spanish teacher at the time or something. But somebody was just like, hey, you might want to, hey, check in on this kid. I wonder if he might be questioning some things. He might be a little confused. And I remember the, counselor pulls me into the room and he goes, hey, do you have have you started wondering about who you are? And I had to sit across from him and go, nah, I got that all figured out. Nah, it's all pretty locked down. I'm good. Thanks, though. And left. It was like, I just remember it being one of those moments.
That's
of
so
just like,
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of cute that if you're quirky and odd and you like film, then you must be dealing with issues of your sexuality. I guess it's sort of
Which, to be clear, again, it was more just like, no, I did. I figured that out. It's all sorted out. It's all locked down now. College is going to be a nightmare. It's going to be fine. I'm going to be a terror. My freshman year, I'm going to be an absolute monster. And then, I'll sort it out. It's amazing Tom still talks to me after freshman year of college, really.
Yeah, but then again, I'm kind of your karmic justice for how you were. I'm like Rorschach. I'm not trapped with you. You're trapped with me.
That's how it's wound up.
You can't escape me at this point. But even just like to kind of like like reflect on like the scene where again the Mike Judge character. I don't because he doesn't tell you who anyone is, so I guess he's like the principal or some administrator, but he's got that buzz cut and those glasses. But when
I think he was. I mean, I know back in the day they used to have people like double tag. I think he was a social studies teacher, because later on in the film he's actually giving a reasonable summary to a class about union.
Yeah, that I was like, wow, would not expect that guy to be a pro union man, but
I know I was kind of shocked. Like, I mean, obviously we're looking through the lens of what's going on today, and so like. But you're right. He looked like the scariest. There was some TV show back in the 60s with the guy like with that buzz cut. I can't even remember the actor, but yeah, he was like a frightening human being. He was frightening.
But the bit where the one kid who punched the other one in the face and he's like, you can't do that, blah, blah, blah. And he's like really taking this kid to task. And to be fair, the kid who punched the dweeb looks like he's going to be a monster when he grows up. He's just got one of those.
He's already got scars all over his face. Yeah,
that kid looks like he's been through hell and back. But like it just like comparing it to like an incident when I was in school and some kid was just like terrorizing me for months in lunch, and he would verbally abuse me, and I was just taking it like whatever, like let the idiot talk. But one day I just snapped, leapt across the lunch table and started beating the shit out of him in front of teachers. And I got dragged and they took me to the vice principal. My mom comes down and they're like, do you know what this kid was saying to my son? And I was too embarrassed to even, which is funny. Mike, knowing me now, was like, Tom wouldn't say bad words in front of people. I wrote down what this kid was saying, and I sheepishly handed it over to the vice principal, and she just starts reading it and goes, okay, well, I have to give you a day of in-school suspension because you beat that kid up, but also you did the right thing. And I was just like, hell yeah. I was like, hell yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's nice to know, because usually that would be like a week of out-of-school suspension, but and I felt so sorry for that poor little guy with the glasses just sitting there, having been, the victim of this very angry kid, but
that's fine. That kid grew up to vote for Pat Buchanan. It's probably I'm sure it worked out.
Well, that's another question I thought about this movie, which is, I was saying about how, it's giving you a bunch of examples of how the kids kind of suck too.
Yes.
How many of these kids in this high school do you think are now no longer able to talk to their children because their children disowned them for being like homophobic and transphobic or some shit?
Without a doubt.
It's like, mom and dad are just watching Fox News nonstop, so we do not allow them to see the grandkids.
I'm willing to bet one of them. I'm going to call at least one of them, specifically when they do the pep rally, right? And they're doing the usual tradition.
You mean the bad football drag? I loved it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that was so perfect.
There's the one kid in the back, and he bugs me every time I watch it because he's just wearing like a weird spiky wig, and he's not putting much effort into the fake boobs. And it's like, dude,
the boobs.
You're that worried that people are going to look at you and go, he's dressing in ladies' clothes like all the other football players. I wonder if he's a gay. Like, no, just do the thing. Just commit to the bit.
My vote, other than the very scarred up bully, because that kid, I mean, he probably like died in like a biker gang fight.
Most of these people from my research are not here anymore. So, we can.
Yeah, I tried to find some of that too. But go ahead. What were you going to say, Colonel?
No, my vote for the one is the girl who the dad is like fighting for her grades or whatever.
Oh, Ralph Cramden.
Yeah. Mona. And then we meet Rona, and then we meet her, and it's almost like a comedy beat where he finally cuts to Rona, and you're just like, oh, this girl has no life behind her eyes. This is, and she's like, I do want to go to school, and she's saying it like she doesn't even know the words that she's saying mean. It's like, I do want to go to school. I want to go to beautician school, and you're like, I
want to be. I can't believe that she was able to even enunciate cosmetologist.
Yes, she is definitely a girl who in the 80s was like, those God just gave those gays HIV because they're just going against the word of the Lord, and you're just like,
Please.
just
Yes.
looking at it, it's like, yeah, you're in the cosmetology business, but you definitely don't like the gays. I know for a fact she doesn't.
I know. I cannot imagine her being successful in that field. First of all, anyway, that's another whole story. But yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad Rona, the two bits with Rona's dad, who again, I've made notes, the Ralph Cramden dad. I love him
Yes.
so much.
He looks like Rodney Dangerfield's brother.
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of effort for that moron, and then to drag in that poor, befuddled, very high primped wife, and then to argue that because a poor teacher, no good deed goes unpunished, a poor teacher wrote like a positive comment on a kid who has like no brain. I mean, yeah, that the guy was such a jerk.
I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. I was wistful for that because, my experience, I've talked about this with my folks since, was the opposite of that, where like, if a teacher wrote something on a report, they were just like, well, there's no way that's inaccurate. You failed.
Yeah.
And I always tell this anecdote that the funniest thing in the world was, it was 8th grade. It wasn't even high school yet. It was 8th grade. And we had to write a paper on a particular legal precedent. Mine was defamation of character. And my dad like gave me some law book to help. My father's a lawyer, and he gave me some law books to help. And then he looked at my essay and he was like, well, that's wrong. And he basically came in and, as every parent is wont to do at least once, just rewrote the essay.
Ooh,
And,
okay.
as can happen sometimes, rewrote the essay. We submitted the essay written by an attorney, and it got like a 95. And that was the moment he went, all right, some of these people are maybe taking it a bit far with the grading. Maybe it's a bit, okay, there are occasionally times somebody might be looking for things to mark down now. Like, it's maybe gotten a bit much.
I also love that dad is going to war to get his daughter a fucking better grade, but also he then ends his scene calling her an idiot.
Yes, I wish if she were only as smart as she is strong or something ridiculous. I know.
And then she's so dumb. The teacher's like, "What did you think of your dad saying that?" She's like, "I liked it." And you're like, "Oh."
Yeah, but you know what? She did utter one of the seminal statements of the entire film in my vision, which is when she's the one student that's able to spit out the 3 words, "It's my life."
Yes. Yes. Well, but even the glasses kid, the little David Holzman's diary kid who's there talking about, well, I told the teacher I'm not gonna, I told the teacher, I'm not gonna speak to you until you're calm. Like, he's doing this whole thing about, being a man is about standing up for your principles and being a man. And then the administrator going, no, being a man means following orders and doing what you're told. You're like, oh.
That was
man.
And that was early on in the film. That was early on. I thought that was what do you say? Something about your principles aren't involved here or something. Yeah. This has got nothing to do with your principles. But anyway, but can we just really? I mean, if you try to look at like fat shaming, yes, toxic masculinity, yes, anti-Semitism, yes, racism, yes. I mean, it's just, Wiseman really touches on a lot of things in a very succinct manner.
The fat shaming is perhaps
the funniest scene in the movie.
The most dark, guys. No, but it's the most darkly funny because when it starts, the first thing you hear the teacher doing is, here's a girl who's like a fuller figured girl, and the teacher going, now here's a girl who knows how to dress. And you have a moment of hope where you're like, oh, good. And then she goes, because she knows she has a weight problem. And she's feeling, and you just, the whiplash of just, Jesus, you could not have written a better, like, slap in the face gag than that abrupt turn. Oh my God.
I mean, she actually asks one of the designers, right, this is a fashion design course, to find a thinner model. Like, I would have, where were the parents then? Where was Rona's dad with that kind of nonsense? I mean, and how to walk, and we're not here to see your derriere. Last time I checked, all anybody wanted to see when I was in high school was my derriere,
Well, I mean, that's also the cinematographer during that jumping jack scene. But.
Yeah.
This is a pro derriere podcast. I'm putting it out there right now. I know we're 3 seasons in. We haven't set an official stance, but I'm putting it right now. We are pro derriere. That is good.
I also think during the jumping jack scene, I did have a conflicted feeling, right? Because here I
Oh
am, and
boy,
I'm sitting here
Mike,
watching.
we're recording this.
Yeah, I know.
I
No,
know,
but I'm saying, like,
Mike, you might, think inside
there was
voice, outside voice, Mike. Go ahead.
because I just had the thought where, in the one hand, like, I went like, man, this is weird that, like, we're sitting here watching, like, 15, 16, 17-year-olds do jumping jacks, and we're closing in on their backsides. But then I also went like, all of these people now are well into their 80s at this point, right? Like,
Yeah. Mhm.
that's so it was a weird moment of just going, right, yeah, that's all of all of these people now are much, beyond, and it's a very odd thing. Like, that's a specific thing, I guess, that this film captures in a way that I hadn't that's kind of tough to hear, because even though it's set in the 60s,
Mhm.
there is such a timelessness to it that it is so easy for me to watch some of these teenagers in this high school
Yes.
and see them as, like, peers in a sense, and kind of put
Mhm.
myself in a hallway with them, and then I have to sit back and kind of realize, like, no, all of these people now are at a point where, like, they've they've run the gamut of a human lifespan at this point. Like,
Yes.
they
They're the reason why the workforce is destroyed in this
I was gonna
country.
say, a lot of them are the reason why we're in the situation we're in. Like,
Mhm.
I look at these people who are in there talking about, like, radical leftist activism, and like, fighting for your individuality. And now, if I find one of them and sit down with them, there's a good chance they're going to go, I mean, the fact of the matter is, Biden didn't really win, so we had a right to go into the Capitol. You know what I'm
Oh my
saying? Like,
God.
there are people in that group.
How many of these kids are actually like going to like track meets and saying that 9-year-old girl ate a girl? I want to see her
Yeah,
genitals. I
yeah,
want to see her birth
exactly.
certificate. It's just
And
like,
that's the thing. It's very, that's one of the kind of bummers in a way. And so you alluded to, like, trying to research these people. There's not a lot you can figure out because we don't get a lot of names.
Well, yeah. Well, the one I was really fixated on, but I obviously it's unknowable. I mean, I guess unless I go to Philadelphia and like stroll into the school, was the poor Bob Walters, who the poor the letter
Yeah.
writing fool at the end, and I don't know why, but I just have this sense that he probably died in Vietnam.
Well,
Because
interestingly, I was able to find something, maybe.
Oh, good.
So I cannot know if this is the same person, but
Right.
I was able to find a Robert Bob Michael Walter, who did serve in Vietnam, served around the same time, and they call him Bob Walter. So I'm, Robert Bob Michael Walter, and quote, proudly served his country during the Vietnam War in the U.S. Navy, where he received multiple service medals and was a POW. After his
Oh, wow.
service, he went back to school, studying at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris, France, and later received his
What?
doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania. Now, there could be a million Bob Walters out
What?
there,
I
but if
want to
you're
dream
going
that.
from
I'm going to dream that that's him.
I mean, this is a Bob Walter who is of the appropriate age and came from Philadelphia.
Yeah, I think we're pretty close.
So
And yet,
if so, happy
and
ending ish.
and add poignancy to poignancy. What does he do in his letter? He apologizes for his penmanship.
Yep. Yep.
Like, and
I,
but Tom, as you said at the beginning, obviously a letter like that means they're doing a great job
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
Northeast High School.
I know it's not Wiseman's style or anything, but I was watching this and thinking it would be interesting to have like him do a follow. I mean, not now, like you said, they're all
Yeah.
probably dead. It's crazy he's even still alive. But like,
Right.
it would have been interesting, like maybe after like high school too, if he did a follow up to high school.
Yeah. Like a 7 and up, 14 and up. That
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah. Do like let's see what the school system actually did to these kids that we saw. Where are those teachers now? Are they still basically doing the same goddamn curriculum and the same little spiels and everything? Like I
I
feel like
mean,
that would have been an interesting. I know it's not his style because he is so much more detached and just fly on the wall
Yes,
and not that like what
I
that kind
agree.
of
He would say
documentary
it's
would
not
need.
important. Yeah. But let me just chime in, because obviously I am just as happy as you guys to laugh and make fun of, all the people that want girls to be the only people, that get to run with girls. I use the term loosely and fluidly. But and the crazy Trumpers who think that the people that stormed our Capitol were, heroes of some twisted sort. But I mean, I was a freshman in high school when Wiseman was doing this, and rather than become like the worst nightmare of these old principled evil people, it really set me on a course, a trajectory in my life where whether it was gay rights or working with people with AIDS or civil rights or advocating for children, I suddenly realized that this is like a terribly wrong way to educate children. And, and I've spent my entire life trying to, well, it's funny, when I retired, they did this cute little like video thingy for me. And one of the things I heard over and over, and it was very, very wonderful, is that the role of an educator, which I think they said I succeeded in, was that you teach individuals how to think, but not what to think. And that certainly was not happening in Northeast High School, and it certainly will not be happening for much longer if these crazy revisionist educators, I feel like that there are a group of people with not little power in this country that would look back at that film and say, this is the way it should be.
Yeah. Well,
Well, I
Let's
mean,
go back to the good old days.
one of these conservative pundits recently just said, "Oh, we should go back to the way it was in the 1200s when it was much more conservative." And he's just like, "Bro,
Are you
you want to
crazy?
live till you're 33? That's
Yeah.
basically what like these people are fucking imbeciles." And I mean, it's interesting, because me and Mike, we went to different schools, but we went to school not too far from each other, the same kind of world and
Oh
everything.
yeah. Hmm.
And it is almost miraculous that me and Mike didn't become like everyone else on Long Island. We
Hmm.
didn't become cops, and we didn't become guys who got married when they were 22 to women that they fundamentally just hate on like a molecular level.
Yes,
And
I agree.
have kids that they just would truly rather sell for a 6-pack of beer than have to like talk to them. Um, and I think
I agree.
I think it's kind of a subtle thing in this movie because he's not. I mean, it is a fly on the wall thing, but I think it's something that me and Mike are examples of, and even and like I joke about it, but the crazy kid who's like, the teacher was being crazy, so I was going to talk to her when she's calm. Like there are
Mhm.
some kids that are just kind of like born to like overcome that they're not going to be beaten down by the education system, but for the most part you're going to get people in these schools that are going to be affected by how these teachers are. And like you said, like a teacher needs to teach a kid individually, teach them how to think, not what to think.
Yeah.
And there are some kids that need that more than others. And not to like toot me and Mike's horn, but like we were kind of just like we've grown and we've become better men but we were always kind of who we were, and nobody was ever going to change us. And we were kind of rebellious in different ways, but like we were always us. And
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
lot of the people we grew up with, they got affected by their surroundings. They were more easily malleable.
Yeah.
And like me and Mike talk about all like how many people we grew up with that are cops now, and
Yeah.
they're just like the amount of time I go out to bars with friends, and I don't like going to bars out here because one, I don't like the kinds of bars out here. It's always sports bars, but like whenever I do, I always see people I went to high school with, and they were the popular kids in high school, and
Oh,
they're like miserable and fat and like
yeah.
clearly like they've got like 50 years of life on their 32-year-old faces, and I'm just like, bro, what the
well,
fuck
but
happened to you guys?
there's also the converse. I mean, to talk to me in high school, like, I sometimes like to tell people, when people look at me now, and it's always funny when, because I am not out at the front of every march with my beret, I get people who look at me like I'm an arch conservative for some reason, which is
Why?
just the climate
Okay.
now. Because
Yeah.
I have at times, I work, not to get too into it on this show, but at
Mhm.
points I worked within the system. I worked, in politics for a little while. I worked on some
Mhm.
campaigns and things. Um, but I do think, like, I grew up around, my friends were all like the very like hippie, super left wing. We're reading Karl Marx and turn on, tune in,
Mhm.
drop out, and all of that. And I
Yes.
think that you see the opposite. You see that too in terms of, like, it's not just getting sucked into the like the factory of like conservatism, but there's also the element of like, you reach a certain point where you're like, I don't. We're past the point where you can get away with being the guy who just gets high and plays guitar. Like, we got to do something. We
I
got to maybe
agree.
try some. Like I say a lot, and I point this a lot. I used to be super, super, I used to sound like those 70s era Godard films, quoting,
Mhm.
Marx.
Yes.
And then And that was kind of easy to do in the 2000s because it was the Bush era, so you could
Yes.
be adamantly pro-war, and also there were no consequences because you knew you weren't going to stop anything. Like
Yeah.
I could have my
Mhm.
little sit-ins in the common area of the high school with people,
Right.
and it
Right.
was never going to change anything. But I remember, like, I spent several days down at Occupy when that happened while I was in college, and that was that. I entered Occupy. I entered Occupy as Friedrich Engels, and I almost left as Alex P. Keaton because you did
Oh
just sit
my
down.
gosh.
That was one of those turning point moments where I was just. That was a
Mhm.
thing where I sat around and I went, okay, so what's the goal here? What are we trying to
What's
change?
the
And like,
plan? Yeah.
yeah,
Or even
well,
what's the plan?
we
Yeah.
have a poster board taped up to that lamppost, and like everybody's writing the goals they want. I'm like, okay, but there's communist goals and anarchist goals and anarcho-syndicalist goals. Like, oh,
Mhm.
we just
Mhm.
want to do drum circles. Like, we don't actually have a plan to do anything. And all the guys in their suits going to their Wall Street jobs are just pointing and laughing at us. Like, we're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
getting anywhere. And that is
Mhm.
setting this in 19 well, not setting this, filming this in 1968
Mhm.
is such an interesting choice because it is
Yeah.
super easy for us to just romanticize that time,
Oh
right?
no.
But it's also, it's important in a way. I sometimes lament um there are certainly when you look, there's enough records declassified. I'm not going to get to this. There's enough records declassified
Right.
to show that yes, the CIA was occasionally involved in
Mhm.
infiltrating certain activist and extremist groups and trying to break them up and trying to cause disruption, right?
Mhm. Absolutely.
It was not as pervasive as you would hear some people suggest.
Okay.
Instead, and when you look at it, there are cases where you look at that and go, oh, in some cases, these were just guys whose movements failed because ultimately they were abusive, shitty people who
Yeah.
are using the idea of like, well, no, you see, the thing is, we absolutely would have turned America into an anarcho-syndicalist state had if it were not for definitely the man seeking to bring us down. It's like, I don't know, man. There's a lot of allegations of you just abusing people in your organization. Like, I think that might have been a factor. I
Mhm.
think the
I
fact
agree.
that you marched on Washington once and spent most of your time just, I don't know, abusing young women, that might be part of the
Yes.
reason your movement fell apart, my man. I don't think, you know, there are definitely cases of it, but
I agree.
like, I don't know. I've always kind of lamented the fact that now people can kind of just point to that specific thing, right? And kind
Mhm.
of go like, well, that's why all of this went awry. And it's like, no, there are actual lessons we can learn
Yeah,
from.
and I think, I mean, I don't know, like, I mean, I think too, just to, I think at the end of the day, it's what your core belief is in just the fundamental nature of human individuals.
Mhm.
Like what I'm hearing, like a more Hobbesian thing, off, like, are we just all craven, wicked, impulsive, selfishly driven narcissists who have to have like overbearing governmental, control? Or, as I prefer to believe, and I know, I mean, you guys will know this reference, nobody else does because you're film buffs, but like I choose to be the Pollyanna,
Mhm.
that I mean, and that's why I spent so many years trying to engage with young people, trying to, and I think, Mike, I don't know if you remember, but like everybody, I think, sort of all of my students sort of suspected that I was, a crazy, insane liberal. But I tried really hard not to let them know that, like I didn't want them to. I didn't want to indoctrinate someone. I didn't want to be and I love this now that DeSantis thinks all educators are just groomers,
Yeah.
like
They're all
leaving behind
groomers, but they
groom.
should be inspecting kids' genitals
Yeah.
before they go into a locker room.
Unbelievable.
The good logic of the right. That's just always on the ball. Those guys.
But I mean,
Um,
and again, I only say that and I say all of that because one of the fascinating things about this, we mentioned the students in class complaining about the school, right?
Right.
And we even talked about, the kid saying, well, I told the teacher I'm going to talk to you when you're more calm. One of the
Yes.
most fascinating inflection points of 68, just from a historical perspective, right, is
Mhm.
that, and look, it's not a great movie at all. So I'm bringing up a movie that we got yelled at for a couple years ago for saying wasn't the worst, but Aaron Sorkin's misguided Trial of the Chicago 7 movie, if anybody remembers that. years later.
I remember I remember the trial. I don't remember Aaron Sorkin's film though.
But so in Sorkin's film, and it's not well directed, it's a mess. But one of the things he was trying to tackle and trying to address was the idea of
Mhm.
like in the conversations between the more moderate student activist groups and like the Abby Hoffmans, the question of like, was this effective activism, right? Like, is
Right.
this actually doing anything? And you go back to that scene with the student of color and the kid in the Jim Morrison or not Jim Morrison, the Ray Manzarek outfit, right? And
Mhm.
here is a student, the student of color is actively trying in a way to talk about like, here's some changes we could make that might make this better. And then the kid in the glass is going, I think it all stinks. We got to bind it down. We got to this, that. It's like, well, we're not going to get your thing, Ray Manzarek. Like
Right.
you're just saying that because you're saying that and it's going to get you recognition from these people around you. But like, the 68 inflection point is kind of like, okay, at what point is this helping? And at what point is this, hurting? And that's kind of, I think, the consistent struggle. And you see it kind of in high school too. Um,
Yes.
that even crystallizes it more when there is a debate. Because Tom, you didn't watch High School too, right?
No, I did not.
Okay, so it takes place at a different high school, a New York high school, with predominantly students of color in a lot of cases, and as opposed to this film, which only has one line acknowledging the assassination of Martin Luther King, which is a wild thing to just hear stray in this movie.
It was
Uh,
horrible. Yeah, and just to interject,
yeah,
I mean, I think he was assassinated while Wiseman was on the property. Like
yep.
this
Yeah.
was when he was. It's just I can't even understand that it was like not even a blip.
So in this, in the High School 2, the Rodney King situation is
Yes.
a central aspect of this, right? And there is a prolonged debate between students of like the one student who's like, well, we're going to get our school together, we're going to get our students together, and we're going to go down and we're going to have a march. And then another student who you get the vibe from looking at her that her parents were activists back in the 60s and 70s because she's going,
Right.
you don't have an organized system. Having a single school do one march is not going to be effective. We need to organize a coalition. We need to have continuous activism. Like, you get this one girl who
Yes.
comes in and she's like, listen, I get that you're pissed off, but you're planning a school play and I'm trying to get something going here,
Yeah.
And
Amen. Amen.
and that's what's kind of fascinating in a way with High School 2 contrasting it too is, and look, I'm not going to pretend that the 90s were a radical time for activism, but you did
No.
get this sense, of these kids in the 90s kind of going, look, we saw how this stuff gained traction and then kind of blew a lot of goodwill at points. Like, let's not do the latter part, right? Like,
Mhm.
let's, I don't know, let's maybe, a shot in the dark here. Um, let's maybe not say that shooting JFK is a good idea. That's probably going to lose us points with the general public. You know,
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
maybe not publish an article in our zine that says the Mansons have the right idea. That
Oh
might
God.
be a bad idea. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
those are the things I hate to say. Like, when you see like movies that don't grapple with the 60s properly and just kind of overly romanticize it
Oh
as
yeah.
like
Of course.
just like,
Peace, love, and tie dye. Yeah.
and you're like, nah, man, you're missing some key elements here, you know?
No.
Weirdly,
It was.
in all of the movies about Woodstock, nobody ever says Weather Underground. I'm just saying. I'm just
No.
saying. We leave
No.
those
I
parts
agree.
out somehow.
I
Um,
agree. I agree with you. And yeah. And the Hell's Angels too.
yeah,
So
oh yeah. Why did they get up to anything? I heard they're great concert security. I
yeah.
hear no issues, none whatsoever.
Mm.
But I think about that sometimes with films about the 60s or anything about the past, which is like
Mhm.
these students don't realize that they're living through history, right? Like they don't necessarily realize that, while it may seem bad, right? Or it may seem rough,
Mhm.
there's no way that they know that like up until 2020, 1968 is going to be shorthand for shit was bad. They
Exactly.
don't
I
know
know.
that. Um, and it often makes me think about like, okay, well, when if someday I should have children, there's going to
Mhm.
be a time where they learn about like 2016 to 2020
I
and look at
know.
me like, how did you people function? What the hell was
Exactly.
any of this? You
I
know?
know. It's so true. I mean, I didn't know living. I guess there was some sort of a seminal awareness that things were shifting. I mean, my father was a New York City cop, and I was like marching with the Black Panthers in Central Park. So, I got a sense that there was a shakeup going on. And I'm just interested, like, what is your read, both of you, like on like like to me now, it's like everybody's too busy making like TikTok videos and seeing how many likes they can get. And maybe if I'm really lucky, I can become an influencer. Like, I don't know. Like, is anybody paying attention?
I think I mean, I would say I think they are. I think in some cases they're paying too much attention in terms of like, I think that one of the struggles that we have had, for me anyway, and again, I say this as somebody who's
Mhm.
used to be much more activist.
Right.
Again, I always try and put this as as bonus. I worked on a campaign in 2016. We didn't win.
Mhm. Okay.
It was a fun time. Definitely not heartbreak. So I was activist then. So I see this stuff. I do think like when I say we focus on too much, like there are certain people who are focused on taking up every single cause, and sometimes causes that don't necessarily exist. Where
Right.
it's like
Yeah, I
I don't,
agree.
like again, it's a thing that you can anticipate if you know history, right? Where in 2015, like around Brooklyn and Queens and where we are, there's like all of these democratic socialist, organizations coming together. And as somebody who studied the 60s and 70s, just going, all right, so we got what, like 6 years before you all start infighting over which brand of Marxism you're going to put up. Yep, there it is. There it
Exactly.
is. Yeah, you're all yelling at each other. So I think there's that. But I also think even the 60s, right? When you actually
Mhm.
sit back and look at it, from 1,000 feet, while it
Yes.
was a tumultuous time, like I often like to bring up to people, like when you talk about the 1960s, this time where you're thinking about the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and everybody's hippie power love. You know what the most popular album in the late 60s was Whipped Cream and Other Delights by Herb Alpert and his Tijuana Brass
I know.
Band.
Oh
Like
gosh, poor Herb Alpert. Oh my.
like most people, I mean that's what
I
like
agree.
I want this to get in the registry 'cause it's such a perfect social satire. Like if you want the perfect film that captures to me what the general vibe for most people was of the 60s, it's Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice.
Oh
It's
wow.
it's
Yep.
rich white liberals going, "Wait a minute. So
Woe is
these young
me.
hippie kids are saying we can smoke dope and have a bunch of sex? Works for
Yep.
me,
Yep.
and nothing else changes."
I totally agree with you.
You
And
know?
that's, I mean, and it's funny. I mean, you talk about having the scope of history and not to get like too teachery. I don't think that's a word. But like, I keep seeing parallels to the French Revolution where everything started out with good values and altruistic ideals, and they end up becoming completely crazy and literally eating their own.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
I mean, I don't know what the future is, but I certainly like, just to narrow the lens back to Northeast High School in Philadelphia, 1968. I mean, to me, maybe, I'm a teacher, but educating the young people, not what to think, but how to think critically, how to think suspiciously, how to understand nuances. We live in a world of gray, not of black and white. And I don't know. I mean, am I finally going to have to hang up my Pollyanna stirrups and say life sucks and then you die?
Well, I also think though,
Yeah.
when it
Yeah.
when it comes to education too, one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is it's easy to watch this film and contrast the teacher who's still reading boring old Casey at the bat and the
Right.
teacher who's playing Simon and Garfunkel and go good and
Right.
bad. I think there's a little more to it than that, which is one of the struggles that I feel right now,
Hmm.
not just in terms of like, culturally, but I think specifically in activism, is we do not have really any kind of a monoculture anymore. And worse
No.
yet, a lot of people who get involved in activism and advocacy, who are doing it maybe for, I'll say the wrong reasons, for the
Oh
ego
yeah.
reasons, have no
Hmm.
interest in engaging in that.
No,
And
I
I think
agree.
that, you know, when I go back to like my time in school, obviously like in your class specific, right? Like I wasn't always reading the text at the right times because I was an asshole, but you guys, your curriculum was very focused on like I am going to give you the foundations of Western literature. And I promise
Hmm.
you, even if you're sitting back going, I don't know if I want to read the Iliad, man. That's old and boring. We should be
Right.
reading new books. It's like, no, man, I promise you, this is a foundation where because everybody reads The Great Gatsby in high school or because everybody reads, the
Hmm.
Iliad or Huck Finn, that's at least one
Right.
piece of common ground you have between somebody anywhere else.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think that one of the things that kind of, sometimes there are sometimes things that you find that get introduced by well-meaning activist people, more liberal type people. They get introduced by them that then the conservatives go, great, I'm going to take that idea and run with it in the wrong direction. And you're like, oh,
Mhm.
shit, we gave them this, right? Like,
Yes,
it
I
goes back
agree.
all the way in the early days of America, when liberals, in the North created vagrancy laws and the South conservatives went, I'm sorry, you're telling me that I can just pick up the people who used to be slaves and make them work for me again?
Yeah,
I
I
can do
agree.
that. Great. And in the same way, like I remember when I was in high school, there was a lot of talk. I remember listening to a report on NPR about it because I was listening to NPR in high school because I was not
Mhm.
cool. And they were
Yes.
talking about
No,
the idea of tailoring curriculums towards students in certain areas and certain regions. And like, well, the whole idea is just to get them interested in reading at all and like not this, that. And it's like, I understand the impulse to do that. I understand the idea to go, for argument's sake, Casey at the Bat is stupid and old. We should chuck it
Mhm.
out. But once you start taking away the idea of like part of education is going like, let's get you caught up to speed on society and
Yeah, this is
American
the
culture.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Once
yeah.
you start removing that, what you are doing is then going, well, if New York can decide that, I don't know, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn is outdated, nobody needs to read it anymore, or Huck
Mhm.
Finn, once New York decides, or New Jersey or whatever, let's not read Huck Finn anymore because, well, some of the language is offensive and this and that, then Ron DeSantis in Florida runs with that and goes, here's all the books we're banning because it'll upset kids. And it's like, right, maybe we do need to, in some
Yeah.
senses, understand that, like, part of this needs to be reaching a common ground. Part of this needs to be having some concept of a monoculture that, like, if I go somewhere else in the country, I can talk to people about that. And I think
Or
too
even
often,
or in the world
yeah.
for that matter.
And I
Yeah.
think
No,
too often, I remember right after the 2016 election, I was dating somebody at the time. And we didn't last because I don't think any relationships could survive the 2016 election. But
right. Oh,
uh,
please don't even
yeah,
get me started. That was my last year teaching,
oh
and
god, Oof.
it was the first time, Mike, you would have loved to be in my classroom at that point because you had like, well, the kids that grow up to be the cops that would sell their children for a 6 pack of beer. I mean, we had about 6 kids that came in with their MAGA hats every day,
Mm,
and
Jesus.
and that it was, yeah, and then we also had like the poor I remember one little girl who was an undocumented immigrant, and she came in the morning after that election just crying, and she felt like the entire world just hated her. I mean, yeah, it was horrible. It was awful.
So I remember her and I arguing because we also had the unfortunate thing of I was overtired because I was at a results watch party the night before.
Oh gosh.
Um, yeah, I've
Yeah.
often I've compared it before. It was truly, I can only imagine what it must have felt like to be aboard the Titanic
Yeah,
because it was
I
a bunch
agree.
of people.
We had a watch party too. I remember it distinctly. It was very
Oh,
traumatic.
I was at our campaign's watch party for Nassau County. So it was all the
Oh
rich
God.
people in their clothes, and we're going, well, we can't possibly sink. We've got this. What's happening in Pennsylvania? Oh dear.
Mhm. Yep,
So,
yep.
but we were fighting, and I remember her just kind of going, I don't understand how these people can do this and vote for that. And one of the things I thought about was like every vacation you said you wanted us to take, every trip you wanted us to take was always in Europe or Asia. Like you have no interest in like, why don't we go take a trip to North Carolina or Alabama or Texas? And
Mhm,
anytime I would bring that
mhm.
up, she'd go, why? I'm like, well,
Right.
because we're
No, I
not even
know.
trying to reach these people. Like, we're not even, and that's maybe in a sense like the thing that's most frustrating about watching Wiseman's film with high school
Mhm,
is the realization of those of us who consider ourselves, activists or educators or advocates, if we're not trying to reach these kids, these are the people that are talking to them, right? If
mhm.
we abandon them to the vibe of, Northeast Philadelphia, this is what they've got, right?
Yeah. Mhm,
So,
mhm.
for as much as we can get out and from the comfort of Union Square or Zuccotti Park or
Yeah.
whatever,
Mhm.
and say, stop sending kids to Vietnam,
Yes.
nobody seems to care that a kid was put through a system where he writes a letter to his school going, thanks for everything. I'm going to Vietnam. Don't feel sad. I'm just a body.
Yep,
Who's
yep,
going there?
yep.
Who's actually
Mhm.
talking to those kids? Like, there's a big difference between, again, to go back to six, there's a big difference between the guys in New York City who
Yes,
held sit-ins at Central Park and the goddamn fucking freedom riders who put their
yes.
lives in their hands and went to people and actually,
Yep. I
went a
agree.
place.
It's about engaging. Right now,
Yeah.
we're all in our own little camps, And but it's an interesting that you bring it up though, Mike. I mean, I'm happy, I'm gratified that you're an advocate still for the Iliad. I mean, obviously, I taught the classical, what are the dead white men? I stuck as many women as I could in, when I was able to. But yeah, there is no consensus. Just there's just no critical thought. Everybody's just knee-jerk reacting to whatever news outlet they subscribe to, and I think the left and the right are equally culpable for that. Well, maybe not exactly, but um,
But
yeah, I
and
mean, I think education is key. I think education is absolutely the seminal piece of this puzzle, and I don't know what the solution is.
we deal with
Obviously,
that. Sorry, you're
no, go
saying?
ahead. Go
No,
ahead. No, go
we
ahead.
deal with that with even in our small little world of film here, right?
Mhm.
Like, we're very fortunate that people listen to this show. It's always cool for me to hear from people, especially if I hear from somebody who's like, I'm going to be a film student, and it's really cool to have somebody talk about the classics or something like that.
Good.
I'm always gratified to, to know that people are seeking this out. Tom has no idea who listens to this show, does
I
not
don't
want to
want.
know
I
who
don't want to know. I don't want to hear from anybody. Leave
no.
me alone.
As far as he
Oh,
knows, no one
Tom.
listens. But in what we're doing here, like one of the things that, you know, by studying film and going back to the classics, like we so often find ourselves in situations where we'll hear people either talk about a movie and go, "Oh, this is so original," and immediately go, "No, no, this guy is just, remaking The Wicker Man or something."
Right,
Or,
right.
or more extremely, like we'll deal with people talking about a movie and how upsetting it is or offensive it is or anything, and have to kind of go, well, actually, like when you watch the film, I
Mhm.
talked about it on a previous episode. I talk about it a lot, so I know I'm being redundant, but like the discourse that went around when Gone with the Wind went up on HBO Max,
Yes.
to
Oh
hear
God.
people talk about that movie, and then to actually sit and watch that movie
Mhm,
are two very
mhm.
different experiences. Like you would hear people talk about Gone with the Wind and think that the movie is just a Confederate flag waving for 4 hours,
No, I
right?
agree with you.
And then you watch it, and in an early scene, Rhett Butler shows up and goes, "You're all idiots. You're all gonna get shot. You're puffing up your chests because even though you've never
Mhm.
worked an honest day in your life." Like, there's just a scene of
Yep.
him excoriating them. And then, as I love to point out, close to the end of the film, Rhett Butler shows up and tells Scarlett O'Hara, essentially, "You're exploiting the 13th Amendment to use prisoners as slaves."
Yep.
Well, shit.
Amen.
We knew that in
Mhm.
1939.
Yep.
Okay.
Amen.
You
Amen.
know, but
I
when you're
agree.
talking,
Well,
yeah.
again, it's the word nuance.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to go into the weeds and thread out the subtlety, and that's why I think film is such an incredibly pertinent and insightful. I mean, it's surgical, and I think film in its best state refuses the simple explanation. It refuses a view of the world that is black and white. And that's why I'm delighted that you guys are doing this. I am thrilled. I am thrilled. It's been such a privilege to talk with you about.
And I do want to touch on just two things about this film before we start winding down, which is the
Sure.
bookends of how Wiseman, because he's very careful and deliberate in his structure, right? That's
I
just
agree.
his thing. And in contrast to what he's made before, in the case of, at this point, it's only Titicut Follies, but still,
Right.
for anybody who remembers Titicut Follies, it begins with like the very upsetting scene of them performing their show and all the inmates singing. Now I've forgotten the title of the song. It's the song that Woody Allen runs to at the end of Manhattan.
Oh, God.
Ba-da-da-ba-ba, ba-da-da-ba-ba, but Strike Up the
Mm.
Band. Strike Up the Band. There we
Yes,
go.
strike up the
Strike Up the
band.
Band.
Good.
So they're singing Strike Up the Band, and they're singing it like horrified in spotlights. And contrast that with a very tranquil, sitting on the dock of the bay, showing the town of Philadelphia, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And yet Wiseman kind of returns to that image because at the end, when the boys are performing their pep rally song or any of the pep rally stuff is going on, Wiseman shoots it and edits it just like the Strike Up the Band sequence in Titicut Follies, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
He's in
Hmm.
either way, his subjects are basically being told, get up on stage, do a little show, dance for us. Which is fascinating. And then how he chooses to end it. Like there's a lot of great moments in this film that we've talked
Yes.
about, like things where you have to imagine he's sitting back with his camera and going, "Oh God, I can't believe I got this." the fight over the
Mhm.
skirt with the skirt going over the knee and the woman going,
Oh
well,
my
my
God,
husband's renting a
yes.
tux, all that.
Apologizing for individualist. I'm
Yeah,
sorry I was individualistic.
yeah.
Yeah, that
It's
was
all of
horrifying.
those, but the epitome, I think,
Mhm.
the epitome of that is what he chooses for the final scene. He shows these kids going up in the rocket. That's a great moment. Oh, one thing I didn't acknowledge, the scene where the kids are on the payphone, right? And
Yes,
the guy's telling him to get off the phone. Now, Tom,
yes.
what scene did you say that reminded you of? Because we talked about this
He
before.
reminds me of fucking Principal Strickland from Back to the Future.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
And
yes.
interestingly, along with that scene directly, and he said it, inspired Wes Anderson for Rushmore. When Max Fisher is on the
Oh.
phone and they're saying you got to get off, and he's covering it up, going, "Hang on, one more minute." He took that
Oh,
from this
wow.
specific scene in this film. But
That's
but the ending, right? Just you have to imagine. Here's Wiseman filming this woman reading this letter of this kid going off to Vietnam.
mhm.
And, camera's rolling, and he's probably sitting back on, well, this would be a decent note to end on, because, in the right light, it might illustrate how callous this school is. And then she turns around and has that line of, don't feel sad for me, I'm only a body. And,
Yeah,
when you get
yeah.
a letter like that, to me, it
Mhm.
says, we're doing great here at Northeast
Yes,
High. And you're like, Jesus,
I
how do you,
know. Yeah.
how?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it does come full circle to that opening set where you see the school structure itself that looks like a factory. It looks like there's an assembly line and they're mass producing uniformity. Awful, awful, awful. And I mean, my husband's a Vietnam veteran. His life has forever been, impacted and challenged negatively because of that horrible experience. And you're right. They were just like they used to call it cannon fodder. They were just bodies. Yeah. So I hope Bob Walters is the guy that went to France
Well,
and
you
got
know
a
what?
job.
We're gonna choose to believe. One of them I can actually tell you. One of the kids, because we don't get a lot of names, but when they read the letter from NASA, the telegram from NASA about the space program,
Yes. Yes.
they say the name John Gabin or
Hmm.
Jane Gabin, which I keep mistaking for actor Jean Gabin, which it's not. But
No.
Jan Gabin apparently died just in 2021 and spent his life as an attorney.
Oh,
I
that
was able to
makes.
find an obituary that says he was a complex and individualistic person. His sense
Ooh,
of
and
humor.
that word is not an accident. That's a very specific reference to individuality or
Yeah.
individualism that they use in the film. That's really cool.
His sense of humor was equaled only by his intelligence. He believed in laughing at things. He did laugh at things. He made other people laugh at things. And then I love this line describing him. He had his own brand of spirituality, one that was reverent to nature, Mother Earth, and natural beauty. So for all of this film leaving you with a sense of like these kids might be doomed and this and that, it's nice to see something like that.
That's beautiful, Mike. That's really, yeah, yeah. It's funny that Spark program, they still have it there
You know?
at the high school. I looked into it because it seemed like what kind of funding they must have had to put together. That was kind of, and that's why I think the black kid in the course was lauding them about at least their science and their technology program. But yeah, but
I,
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I think was that the kid that everybody was laughing because his beard grew so long when he was
I,
in the capsule.
that I can't know because they just read
Yeah,
the names off the letter.
right. That's
Um,
true. That's true.
But no, I'm
Yeah.
glad they still have the program. Unfortunately, due to the way they fund education now, the program is still telling them we've got to beat the Soviets to the moon. But you know what? We'll roll with it. It's fine. It's all good. Um, just
Oh,
imagining
Michael.
some bored teacher in 2021 reading a clipboard going, "We can't let Brezhnev beat us." Okay, well, whatever that means.
Oh my God, Michael, you are such a gift. Thank you. I love. I'm so happy we got to spend this time together.
Well, on that note, did anybody have any more thoughts they wanted to add on high school before we wrap up, as we always do, talking about that year's Academy Awards?
0.
Tom, we're not
No,
Tom.
just
I have told you have to wait for ad purposes. You can't just yell that. Okay,
no.
Celia, do you have any
0.
more thoughts on high school before we?
No, the
Okay.
only I mean, I think just quickly the sort of visual metaphors that I enjoyed was the Spanish teacher making them say existencialista over
Yes.
and over and over when no one in that entire world or universe has any concept of
Yep.
what it
Yep.
meant.
Yep.
Listen, she
Oh,
could tell me to tell existentialista all day long. That's
oh my
just
gosh. I know. Oh yeah, and then my other favorite is any questions? No, there are no questions. That is a question-free zone.
So with that, Tom, how do you think Frederick Wiseman's high school did at the Academy Awards that year?
The Goose Egg.
No, that's correct. It was not nominated for any Oscars. However, Wiseman would receive an honorary Academy Award many years later. I don't believe any of his films have ever been nominated properly for the Oscar. I know Ex Libris came very close, I think, in its year, but none have been nominated. It could have been nominated for Best Documentary Feature that year. Now, here's a little interesting trivia fact. Tom, can you tell me what documentary won Best Documentary Feature at the Academy Awards that year?
I can't.
The answer is, it depends on who you ask. This is the only time that something won an Oscar and then they took it away.
What?
The nominees that year were A Few Notes on Our Food Problem, The Legendary Champions, Other Voices, and then Journey into Self and Young Americans. Young Americans wins the Oscar. It's a documentary about this singing group for teens called the Young Americans, right? It wins the Oscar that night. A month later, they determine it is disqualified because it was actually released too early to be eligible. So they just quietly give it to Journey into Self. Now, I will say, do I think you should revoke an Oscar because you later find out it was released too early? No. Do I think they should have revoked its Oscar because that movie, Young Americans, is not in any way a documentary because it's full of scripted dialogue and stage scenes and also sucks? Yes. I think take its Oscar away. Journey into Self is at least kind of cool because it was about this group therapy thing, and they just film a group therapy session for 45 minutes. Interesting note about those nominees, The Legendary Champions is a documentary about boxing history, the legendary boxing champions, that has a funk music intro and laugh-in style font, and is directed by Harry Chapin.
Oh, wow.
That Harry Chapin just
Wow.
directed an Oscar-nominated documentary, and it's never talked about. And just for edification, the Best Picture nominees that year, we've talked about before, because this is the same year as David Holzman's Diary and a whole bunch, were Funny Girl, The Lion in Winter, Rachel, Romeo and Juliet, and the winner, Oliver. And out of those, only Funny Girl is in the registry, so we'll be talking about that on a future season.
Wow, that's crazy. That's memory lane for me.
That is...
And now the actors from Romeo and Juliet are suing the people that exploited them, apparently. So
that's hard. I'm sorry. I have a hard time believing that Italian filmmakers in the late 60s did not have respect for human dignity. That's tough. Based on all I know about the Italian...
Listen, the Italians are lovely people. They are a very tactful and tasteful filmmaking group.
Absolutely.
I believe that lawsuit already got them dismissed. I'm pretty sure I read that it already got dismissed.
No sexploitation. Sexploitation.
No, Italian cinema, very, very respectful.
Very.
Absolutely.
You're always going to get good things when you give an Italian filmmaker women or animals. There will never be anything that goes wrong with those things.
I truly for a minute thought you were about to go, you never get anything good when you give an Italian money. I really thought you were just going to go there.
Well, you don't. That is why I'm going to be poor the rest of my life. The world knows that I should not have money.
This is great because later in this season we have to do the 1915 movie The Italian, which its entire thesis statement in 1915 is to go, maybe Italians are people?
Oh wow.
We're not. That's a flawed thesis.
We will get into it on that episode, but it is so funny that they were about to make this very humanist drama about an Italian immigrant and his struggles. The entire point of the movie is let's make the audience understand that these Italian immigrants are people and should be treated with dignity. And then the director went, I think we should call it Dago. And the actor had to step in and go, don't do that.
That's bad.
That's going to undermine the movie.
That is so bad.
Yep. And yet the play it's based on is even more offensively titled. Anyway, with that being said, Celia Blumm,
the Spaghetti Benders.
Tom, it's worse. And you know what it is. It's 3 letters, and it starts with a W. Yep.
Oh, no, stop it. Stop it. Oh, my gosh.
there is something. I mean, look, sorry, I'll wrap us up. But Tom and I, we kind of always delight because we're both, we've got vowels at the end of our last names, so
You
we
do,
always
you
just become
do.
fascinated by like when you go back to like the turn of the century, and because
Yeah.
now you deal with like conservative Long Island Italians, and you're like, man, 100 years ago,
Right,
they're
exactly.
they're doing all of this to you, like
I
100
Dude,
years
agree.
ago.
I
almost
agree.
like more like 60 or 70 years ago, bro.
It's yeah,
Like we
there's
weren't we weren't white 60, 70
read
years ago.
read the
No, they
reviews.
weren't. No. And I mean, I'm Irish. I still hear the stories about, no Irish or dogs allowed
Yeah.
in your bar kind of thing. Yeah.
Hell, go back and read some reviews of Rio Bravo and the people who are
Oh,
mad that Dean Martin's in a Western. You will
yes,
see phrases you did not know were slurs.
I
You'll be
know.
like,
It's outrageous.
how
Oh
did
my
this
God.
get published in the USA
It's
Today?
outrageous.
Like, Anyway, Celia Blum, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for reconnecting after all these years. I know we had a
Thank you so much.
bunch of hiccups getting this together. I'm so glad we were able to do this.
No, and I said you're doing something very valuable because film is the literature of our time, and I'm so glad that you guys are putting your time and resources into doing it justice.
But Celia, thank you so much for doing this. Did you have anything you wanted to plug? Anything you wanted to toss out? I mean, you've talked about
Um,
being a retired English teacher, so I don't know if you have
critical
podcasts you're plugging
thinking.
or anything. Yeah.
No, critical thinking, subtlety, nuance, and oh yeah, and I love the right wing claiming that they want to go back to classical education. Classical where Achilles and Patroclus were lovers, and where Zeus had to take hermaphroditic humans and change up their sex organs. Yeah, that's the classical education that they want to have in Florida. So yeah, that's what I'm plugging.
Well, Celia, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. But everybody else, stick around. We'll be right back with our picks for the National Film Registry.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and me, who can submit their nominations for the registry in the form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of every episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration on behalf of You're Missing Out. The only criteria? It must be an American film that's at least 10 years old. Here are today's picks.
So, when it comes to, high school, I was thinking about the fact that Wiseman manages to capture kind of these young people who have young, middle-class people. This is not like an underprivileged school or an underfunded school. In fact, he went there with the idea of, I just filmed a failing institution in Titicut Follies. I'm going to film a successful institution with high school, and obviously found something else. But the idea was like, these are the kids who have, air quotes, every advantage, and look at how they turn out. And as I was watching it, I was struck by another documentary that comes along a little less than 20 years after high school. We're in 1984. And that's when Martin Bell went out into the streets of Seattle. He had seen a Life magazine article about homeless kids. And he decides to go out into the Seattle streets and chronicle the lives of kids out on the streets. The film is called Streetwise. It was nominated for an Academy Award. Didn't win, but it was nominated for the Academy Award. It's one of the first time I saw it was in college. It is one of the most striking documentaries you can see, because unlike Wiseman's films, where you're a fly on the wall, you don't know who any of the inmates in the asylum are, you don't know who any of the students in the school are. This film is following 9 teenagers on the streets, dumpster divers, hustlers, and then the one who really catches your attention is Erin Blackwell, who goes by the name Tiny, who is a teenage prostitute. And, you watch her struggles in this film, and not just that she's out on the streets. It's the fact that it's easy to go into this film and hear like, oh, young, child prostitute, and realize like, well, think to yourself, she must be an orphan. She must be whatever. She has a family. She has a mother that she lives with who is an alcoholic, who just describes her like 13-year-old child out on the streets as a prostitute and describes it as a phase. Streetwise really captures how much American institutions fail young people. It's a powerfully evocative documentary, and I think it is very interesting that it comes out in 1984, which is largely, when we think about movies of 1984, it's the epitome of rah rah yay cinema in some senses. But Streetwise really just shows how many people we've abandoned. Decades later, Bell would follow up with Aaron Blackwell, aka Tiny, with a film called Tiny Revisited that's also included on the Criterion. But Streetwise is just one of the more powerful documents of the time. It is genuinely surprising it is not in the registry yet, and I believe it absolutely should be.
So for my pick, simple. Thought about a movie that was, I think, in my opinion, one of the most accurate, just kind of representations of high school. And it's surprised it's not in. Surprised this filmmaker's not more represented. I'm picking Dazed and Confused. I mean, it's set 8 years after this documentary was filmed. It's got a similar vibe. Wouldn't doubt that if Linklater saw this in film school when he was in Austin, it just has that the school stuff has that similar vibe, and the kids have a similar vibe to some of the kids in this movie. It really just, I remember watching Dazed and Confused in high school for the first time, and I came in to school in a Dazed and Confused shirt, and one of my teachers was like, "Yeah, that movie was exactly what it was like in high school in 1976." And you can feel it. It just has such an unbelievably, like, almost unparalleled sense of time and place and just life. I think it's one of the best movies ever made. It's easily one of the best movies of the 90s. It's an unbelievable picture. And I think Linklater needs to be much more represented in the registry, just for his impact, not just in film in general, but like the indie film revolution. I mean, it wasn't just Soderbergh and Quentin and Kevin Smith. Linklater was a big part of that, and I think he needs to get his just due at some point, other than Slacker. So Dazed and Confused is my pick.
Let's all go to the lobby.
Thank you again to Celia Blumm for joining us. Next week, we sense a disturbance in the Force. Actually, it's Patrick Kottner, fulfilling his destiny to discuss Frankenstein and Star Wars Bounty Hunter. Don't forget to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Here on You're Missing Out.
They honor movies of historical, cultural, or aesthetic importance on the National Film Registry.